Hi, everyone. It's Michelle Gibson, and I'm here today with Stephanie. And she's got a presentation of photographs that she's taken that she'd like to share with us. Stephanie reached out to me, I guess, probably last year about this time, and was on a trip to Arizona, and we weren't able to connect then, but we've been in touch by email since then. And I invited her to be with me here today because I know she is really interested in this type of subject and is another example of somebody that's woke up to this. And once you see it, you can't not see it. It's literally everywhere. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Stephanie, and what we're going to be talking about today?
I was born and halfway raised on the east side of the country outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and went to Boston a lot when I was a little kid, have very fond memories of it. But I was always a hyper curious kid, and there were a lot of things that sparked my interest even back then. Then we went to California, kind of spent that time going to school in the 80s, and then I moved to Arizona. Some interesting things, but I would say I was mostly dulled down. My curiosity had been dampened. But well, around 2020, my best friend, who's another Stephanie, kind of awakened me to a lot of alternative thinking on many issues, including the shape of the realm. And I dove into that with a fervor. And then once I was convinced of that, I was kind of bored with it. And somewhere along the line, these paths crossed with the people who are investigating that and the people that are investigating the historical lie that we've all been told. And that research really resonated with me because I had a lot of questions from a very, very young age, like 8 years old. I didn't understand why there were stairways that went down below ground to a doorway, a sub-street level doorway and windows down below and in the city of Boston, and the glass blocks that show down to whatever's down there in the sidewalks. And all those questions occurred to me. We had occasion to be at North Station a lot for the train because we could take the train from where I lived into town. And I loved North Station. It was the intricacies and the beauty of the interior of that train station was something that I have now looked everywhere. Maybe somebody who's more clever than I can find photographic evidence of the interior, but it seems like it's been largely scrubbed or no one ever took a picture because they didn't notice how cool it was. But they destroyed that. They tore it down. I mean, when I found out that they had torn down North Station, I was like heartsick over it. And I do have some pictures of that. In fact, I could probably start there since that's where I started. And then I have a whole slew of questions for you because every time I watch something that you put out, I think, oh, I wonder what she thinks about this. Your research is so thorough and I'm kind of all over the map. But when I moved from Arizona to Tennessee, I was right on the cusp I was just starting to wake up to this old world idea. And there's so much to see here. I kind of wish I could go back to the areas because I think there was probably a lot more to see that I didn't see because I wasn't seeing at the time. Let me see if I can't go back to my Boston folder here.
And I was doing some research around Boston within the last couple months, and I came across the North Station and the South Station. And I guess the South Station, they didn't tear down the original building, or at least it looked like they didn't.
Oh, this is North Station. Back in the day, this is South Station. There's the new one, so they fixed it.
Right.
Unbelievable. Like, what? You turned that into this? Oh, yeah. This is Scally Square, I think. That's all gone. They demolished the whole thing. Look at it. It clearly needed to be torn down.
Right. Inferior workmanship. They give that excuse a lot.
Look at this. It makes me heartsick. Sometimes it makes me actually physically nauseous, like seeing it. And there's a nowadays picture of South Station. I commented on someone's video. They were saying how actually Boston Garden, which was attached to North Station, it was a big arena, which is an interesting thing that there was an arena in there. And again, if I could only go back in time and take pictures of the things that I saw at the time that we take for granted, we think it's always going to be there and it's not there anymore. And no one took any cool pictures. Like Chris Kelly always pulls up stuff from that Card Cow site, the postcards. I couldn't even find anything really there. So the Boston thing was probably the first thing that sparked it for me when I was young. And it always stuck in the back of my head, as it does. We didn't have digital cameras back in the day, but I've sung in Europe. And while everybody else was getting strong German beer, I was out looking at stuff and going, oh my, like the churches, the cathedrals, phenomenal. So that led me to I've always been kind of a church freak. I was in Chester, England with my cousin. My family's British, and I went and visited him, and I kept dragging him into churches. He was really aggravated. You've seen one bloody church, you've seen them all. And I was like, no, they're all different. They're really cool. And there was this one in Chester that had below ground windows, but you could look down underneath, and there were Roman ruins down there. That's what they told us anyway. But it was like knocked over pillars and stuff. It's just fascinating. And listening to people like you who have really looked at it from a scientific standpoint, it kind of helps glue it all together. I think for me, it's like, it makes really good sense to me that this was not built by our civilization in any way. And I guess when people will say, like they say about all things, well, what difference does it make? What does it matter? I think that what matters is that, why'd you have to lie to me? I like truth. And how much more fun would it have been to have been exploring the ideas, even if it was something that they didn't know. I suspect that they do know what happened. And there's a small group of people that do know what happened, but they are leaving that only for the specials, some people to know and for us to piece together. But I do think it's curious that there's this huge made up history. Okay. So we got to Tennessee, and one of the first drives we went on was up the hill to a town called Winchester. I think it was because I was talking about how my daughter was into Harry Potter. And this guy here, he said, well, we have the real Hogwarts right here in Tennessee. And I was like, what? And he said, yeah, it's called the University of the South at Sewanee. So this is one of the buildings. So I thought that was interesting. I took a picture of that.
It's easy to carve dates and symbols into stone. It's not easy to build like that.
Yeah, I just watched a video of the courthouse in Portland, Oregon, that the observation lounge guy was pointing out how they had removed the cornerstone and replaced it. And he's got old pictures where you can see that cornerstone that is now there was not there on the original building. How crazy. It's like, it's that big of a thing that we're going to pull out a megalithic block and replace it with a different one so that we can have this narrative. It's crazy. So one of my little questions I had is, so in all the pictures that I've taken, there are a lot of those where it's got a thing way up high. It's like a smooth surface and it's got some scrolly stuff on it. And sometimes there's words on it, but by and large, the ones that I've seen are blank. Like they came along and they sanded it off because it looks like a sign. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. And they probably did. I mean, just like with this example here of the stone with the date, I think they did that a lot.
I have a fun one that I'm going to show you after the Sewanee thing, if I can make it work. So that was cool. There's another, see the blank right there?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like that would have had something on there. These are just some random buildings. Kids go to school here in Tennessee. So a lot of times, my daughter rolls her eyes at me when I bring up these things. So I said to her, okay, this is an Anglican church. It's an Episcopalian college at the top of a mountain in rural Tennessee. The population when this was to have been built was like 2,000. And they were driving horses and buggies, but they decided to go up to the top of a mountain and build this. Like, it makes no sense. Why would you do that? You've got that few people and supposedly built not too far away from when we were breaking away from the Church of England, right? I mean, that's the story. 1776, we break away, we fight against the British. And so what do we got to do? We got to build an Anglican church at the top of a mountain in Tennessee. Crazy. This is the cathedral. Is that magnificent? I mean, it rivals anything that I saw in Europe.
And they've managed to hide it from us, and very challenging because it's like we don't have that ability to think critically and ask questions about how are they, like you said, how are they building it, where they were building it, when they were building it, with the technology we've been taught that they would have had.
How did they get the stuff up there? I mean, yeah, it's like some of the buildings that are out in the middle of the ocean. Like, hey, I have an idea. Why build it here on this nice flat land? Let's rowboat the megalithic stones out to that island. It's nuts. And nobody ever mentions it. Now, look at that organ. The organs is another crazy thing. I don't know. Do you think that these quote unquote churches, what's your take on it? Do you think they were healing centers or?
I'm in agreement with that. Healing, resonating, where people would come together and just resonate together and heal together. I see it as very benevolent, this civilization, not at all what we've been told. Everything was harmonious. People
Not
didn't
wars.
fight each other.
Mhm.
People were co-creating beauty together, is what I see. And everything was perfectly tuned musically, scientifically, and the whole civilization functioned together with these healing frequencies. The cathedral rose window is right up there behind the organ pipes. That would be sending out whatever frequency that represented. And you see train stations with the same types of windows. So that says something. There's something scientific and power-wise going on with this infrastructure that's all connected together.
And I found organs in a bunch of weird buildings. So what was supposed to be an asylum, there's this giant pipe organ in the recreation room or something. It's like, why does this asylum need a pipe organ, right? Oh, that was another thing that I was going to ask you about that word. I bet you've talked about this in some other presentation and I either didn't notice or it hadn't occurred to me yet. But asylum and asylum, like people come here to seek asylum, but our asylums were to put all the people in that were crazy or whatever. We called them insane asylums. My suspicion is that it was a place to put the people that weren't rolling along with the new narrative. I don't know. It's just a thought, but
I think it was a combination of things. That was very much a part of it. Those asylums were repurposed infrastructure from the original system.
Yeah.
They weren't built when we were told they were built like these places. Right. And I look at the 19th century as a mess for humanity. The main reset century was that 100-year period with a lot going on in the in-between. The date that you showed earlier on that stone was, I think, 1846. So that's right in there when they're ramping all of this up and creating their new narrative and making things usable and serviceable. And they had this human problem, either survivors of whatever caused the destruction or people that they made. And I think there was a lot of human engineering going on by those responsible for this. So then you hear about the orphan trains and all this other stuff, but I don't know much about the Cabbage Patch situation, but I've heard about that. And then you hear about the Infantorians.
It's so cool, the Cabbage Patch thing. I've watched pretty much every video. I don't have total recall. I get an idea of something and there's enough evidence that it becomes a compelling theory because otherwise, why? And it's right there. It's like when people say, oh, they're giants as a fairy tale. Oh, really? Because we have a bunch of pictures of them. I mean, they had good cameras from early 1800s. I have pictures, family pictures in my possession that are really quite sharp and clear. So like a lot of these crap photographs that we have, I'm not sure why they're so awful. It might be partly because they don't want anything to be clear because we'd be able to see. But, the sheer size of those institutions, usually when I look up anything to find out what they're saying, what they're telling us, this is what you're supposed to believe. And I look up, and the first thing I do is look up what the population of the area was. And then you see this asylum, like everybody would have been in it. There weren't that many people there to decide, well, this would be a good building to house them all in, Yeah,
the same buildings that became asylums became universities, became prisons, became high schools and elementary schools.
Right.
They were just government buildings, just picking and choosing. But to your question about the asylums, they had insane asylums, they had orphanages, they had debtors' prisons, they had poor farms. And I think they were trying to keep our consciousness at a very low level. So whoever ended up at these places did not have a good experience, I'm sure. I think they were on the grid, they were all on the grid system, and all of that negative suffering kind of energy was going into the grid system. And we wonder why people are so asleep today. And it's because they've been manipulating this grid that was originally free energy generating system. They've been manipulating to keep our consciousness at a low level so they could control us.
That's my most recent mania. I think it wasn't you. It might have been John Levi, but he did an aerial thing that probably was just on Google Earth or whatever. And he pointed out this circuit board area. And of course, it was out in the desert southwest or west or whatever. And it was so clear. And I went, whoa. It was kind of like the double rainbow thing. It's like, whoa, that is clearly a circuit board. And that sparked in me. I've watched a lot of your stuff. I'm not sure I even understand all the ley line stuff yet. We built a lot of houses when I was a kid. My mother was into not staying in one house for very long. She had to build another one. And I feel like ley lines were part of the construction process.
I believe so. in the sense that this original advanced civilization built everything out along these ley lines.
What does it actually mean, the ley line?
It's like a line of groomed electromagnetic energy that's connected to the earth forces, earth energy forces. And it's also built out along the lines of sacred geometry.
Is that the common?
It's like their line of sight, like the steeples of the churches and all of the antiquity on top. The domes, what we would think of as lightning rods. They were probably part of this system. Everything's laid out along a grid, like what you saw in John's video. It's like a circuit board. It's like everything is placed for a function and a purpose. Nothing was random. And that's a big part of the narrative that we're taught. Some guy arrived here, let's say 1750, I'm pulling that date out of the air, and they just started building. And then miracle of miracles, within 10, 20 years, you see a lot of those bird's eye views of these towns that magically sprang up overnight in these gridded areas. And you can see the shape of, think of a sheet of graph paper. That's just one aspect of it. And some people are like intuitively aware of the ley lines, and they know incredible things because they have this connection. And I think that's how a lot of people get into researching ley lines, because they do have some kind of understanding somehow, because there's not a lot of information available on them. That's something that they've removed from our awareness.
Well, I was just going to say, of course, kind of like dowsing.
There's so much more to them. I mean, it's like there's a consciousness there.
So it isn't really a common narrative term. It's more something that we use in this community to describe the layout.
It's a thing. It's a real thing. I mean, a lot of places have LEY in the name, or street names. So the memories there, lay. The idea of lays as straight tracks across the landscape was first put forward by the English antiquarian Alfred Watkins in the 1920s, particularly in his book, The Old Straight Track. He argued that straight lines could be drawn between various historic structures, and that these represented trade routes created by ancient British societies. And not only are they straight lines, but they're also, you can find circular lays as well. You can find really big long distance ones, and then you can find lays that aren't long distance, local, but they tend to be connected to a longer one. The ley lines going through Britain connect with ley lines in other parts of the world.
It's crazy. That one guy that you were talking to, I was just like, my head was spinning at all the connectivity, but it does make a lot of sense when you think about it. I don't know how anybody could look at even just the remarkable sameness of the old world structures. We're calling them old world structures, but just the similarity. They're all over the world. Some of the buildings that you see that are in these obscure places that nobody's ever heard of. Here you see this giant building that looks like it could be in London. For anybody to deny that there was some connectivity between the people, I mean, why would they just randomly build exactly the same everywhere? Makes no sense.
Supposedly, we were building the same kind of architecture in our narrative in the 1800s and 1900s that they were building in ancient Rome. We don't build that way now.
Yeah, it's crazy. Let me finish this one because I want to show you some other stuff. It looks like a castle. So after I went there, I kind of went on a little mission to find other random places. So anywhere someone would mention to me, I would say, oh, I'm going to go check that out. My initial theory was that none of this makes sense because of the populations. The Sewanee thing is crazy because the population and the geography, because it's at the top of a hill. But the population does not even, I mean, that church up there seats like 500 people. It's huge. You have a congregation at the top of the mountain. Here in Tennessee, Methodist Church is huge here, and the Church of Christ is huge here. You barely see an Anglican church. I mean, we had Episcopal churches all over the place in Arizona. They're not here very much. So it's kind of weird that the church that's up there on the hill is an Episcopal church. So I went to this little town, little teeny town. This was one of my questions, and I'm sure this has to do with the ley line thing, but I got Google Earth on my phone so I could zoom in and do the little guy thing. And all the little towns here, and kind of like in Europe where they have the plazas, everywhere they've got the plaza. And it's a setup that it's the same shape, no matter where you go, no matter what city you're in. There's a plaza and the big buildings. Here in the South, every little town has a square. They all have a square, and in the middle of the square is a courthouse. You got to have a courthouse because a lot of criminals. So got to have a courthouse and all the civic things that we must have been doing back then. So this particular town is called McMinnville. And so I drove out to McMinnville because I wanted to look at it. And not to disappoint, it had the town square, and it's slightly larger than it's like double the town that I'm in. Here we go. It's my favorite part, the demographics. So in 1850, the population was 420. 420, that's it. Let's see if we can zoom in on this. Oh yeah, this was under the auspices of the Women's Civic League. I can't read the one on top.
Does that say 1814?
Yeah.
1814.
Yep. I think so. Wait, no, that might be 19. Wait. Nope, it's 1814.
It's 18.
18, yeah, 1814. Okay, so they don't even have the earliest population they record is 420, but in how many, 34 years earlier or 36 years earlier, they had to have this. Very important that they have this statue there. Okay, here's the building. Okay, so this is the courthouse. So I'm at the courthouse, foundation stone, second courthouse. There's 4 total. In 1850, there were 420 people there. Now, this is the second one, so probably the first one was like a log cabin. In the front, they have these stones, foundation stone, second courthouse. And then right next to it, you've got foundation stone, third courthouse. And of course, no time elapses. 1858 was the leave off to 1890 something. And that was the third one. The one that's there is the fourth one. So I keep wandering around. I was laughing already because, first of all, the stones are exactly the same.
They almost look like gravestones.
Right? Yeah,
Here lies.
This is erected in, okay, here we are on courthouse number 4, the one that is still standing. And it says it was erected in 1897, and there's a bunch of names there. And so I saw that, and then I walked around the corner of the building. Oh, look what we found. That's interesting. That is around the side from the erected sign. And so look, those fellows had something to do with it. It's too worn to tell what it says, but there are letters. This is a curiosity as well. And I found it up in Sewanee. One of the buildings, I didn't take a picture of it, but one of the buildings had a sign which did have lettering above a doorway. And there was a professor there that was very interested to show us around. And he had been there for 30 years and he knew everything about it. And I said, what does that say? Because it wasn't regular letters. They looked sort of like regular letters. This is blurry, so you can't really see it. But I almost, if I blur my eyes, I almost see the word in the second line down. I don't know if you see it, but it almost looks like it says Mason. Do you see that?
Not very well.
But you do see the Masonic symbol, right?
Yes, I do.
Which I thought was interesting. I find that all the time. We also found that up at Sewanee. Didn't take a picture of it for whatever reason. But the guy, he's looking at it, he's staring at it. The guy's worked there for 30 years. He's staring at the sign to try and figure out what it said. And it kind of roughly looked like Sewanee, but it had way too many letters to be Sewanee. And so after pondering it for a moment, he just said, well, it says Sewanee. And I was like, he knew it didn't say Sewanee. I knew it didn't say Sewanee. It had a similar look to it, but it was so bizarre. And that's what this sign was like too. The letters weren't all, I don't know. Have you ever seen that where it kind of looks like English, but not really?
Yeah. No telling what they were doing. That could have been some original language or something like that they've obscured somehow. And it's also interesting, what you're bringing up about the 4 courthouses in one location. That was typical. When I was looking into courthouses following linear alignments in North America, for example, every single county seat that I came to had at least 3 or 4 courthouses. For some reason, they used that explanation over and over and over again.
Clearly, it's the same. It's not a different courthouse.
Right. Sometimes they have the different pictures and they say it was built in the same location, which I don't believe. I think they were just showing pictures of different buildings that they tore down or something like that. And then there's like the courthouse there today kind of thing. But that was common. And like I said, they're not very original in their cover stories. They recycle them all the time.
Well, it's like the fire narrative that all these places that burned down, that they're solid block, but they burned down. This I thought was cool was its tower thing, cylindrical section up there. Look at that cool windows, like a keyhole.
Yeah, just beautiful architecture.
This was an interesting wall thing. These I see everywhere.
And that's what I would call mud flood evidence. That's another thing you see everywhere is why build like that, where it looks like there's more building down below and that they just paved over or made serviceable a portion of it for a road or a sidewalk or whatever, but it's uneven. The sidewalks are uneven. The walls are uneven. There's,
a maximum of 1,500 people here, but we're building stuff. It's all this detail. Oh, let's just add on a little more. Was the government built? Oh, there we are back at that's the courthouse, the side of the courthouse. I walked all the way around. But see, that one's regular writing.
And again, they're telling us 1931, right?
Yeah, it didn't make any sense. They don't seem to have any problem just saying random things. Someone once said, if it doesn't make total sense, it's probably not entirely true. If it doesn't make sense at all, it's a lie. And that's what I've found with this stuff. It's like, it doesn't make sense at all. My mother would say, tell a lie when the truth would do just as well. It's so true. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, so this building really caught my attention when we first got here. So this is still in existence and it's remarkable. The upper floor here has been made into an Airbnb and I didn't know anything about this. I think maybe Chris Kelly might have brought my attention to the Knights of Pythias.
So the Knights of Pythias are really interesting because I encountered them in my research tracking ley lines. And supposedly they were created by an act of Congress in 1864, which would have been during the American Civil War. And their purpose was to build homes for widows and orphans.
Oh, right. But the Oddfellows are the ones that take care of the widows and the orphans.
So that's another one. So there seems to be these secret societies that I consider part of the reset. They were involved in the actual reset of these places. And that was what the Knights of Pythias had as their reason for being, was building these beautiful castles and so forth as a place for widows and orphans from the American Civil War to live. And I have a lot of questions about whether the Civil War actually even happened, certainly not as the way we're told.
The one that I currently have up is the side of the Pythian building.
Different kinds of brick.
This is the side of it too. And also like the filled in windows and kind of weirdly random here. This is the side of that crazy castle building. This is today. I took this a few weeks ago.
Love it.
This is upstairs. This building's for sale. And I went in there to look at it. And the outside, so here's the windows. That's exactly what you'd expect the windows to be, right? The arched windows. And do you see how it's got this vertical pattern here? On the outside, they've got some kind of fiberglass stuff that's just facing the whole front of the building and covering up the windows. Very, very strange. I don't understand why, because it's ugly. And underneath, you've got this. It's fine. And all this scaffolding in here, I have no idea why it's not doing anything. Oh, this is a weird stone wall. That's one of my questions. So do you think, is that actually the way anybody builds a stone wall? Or is that maybe some melt or something?
So it's interesting because you've got the moss on the top, which is a signifier of age. Moss takes a long time to grow. But that particular wall almost looks like it was thrown together as opposed to having been built by the original civilization. That one almost looks like from all of it looks like cement or something in there. It looks like they just cemented it together, is what it looked like to me.
But here's another section of it.
Yeah.
This whole wall thing was a real head scratcher for me. I was just driving around and I saw that and I was like, wait, what?
That's a good catch because I would say the majority of walls that are claimed more recently were built originally at the same time as the architecture and everything else. But this is an example of something, like you said, it's like a head scratcher. It's like, okay, what's going on here? And it really almost looks like they were just trying to make a wall from what they had available.
Maybe. I don't know. It's weird because there's stuff like brick and then there's some like weird cobbled wall and oh, this is Lewisburg. I just drove through there the other day. I couldn't remember where I was. It's another square. This is a little town called Petersburg, teeniest little town. And if you look back here, see that thing right there? They've just recently redone all this. This is like supposedly a gas station from the 50s, but this is obviously not from then. So this is part of our square. This is all 4 streets that go around a courthouse, like all of the little towns here. You can look up and see, like this one says post office up here, and who knows what that said, but they've been through many, many iterations from when they were originally founded. None of the time frame really matches. This was stuff I was able to find on the internet. This is supposedly the oldest house in Middle Tennessee. Can you see what it says up there? Because mine's covered. Is it
1787, Bowen House.
This is in Petersburg as well. This is supposedly a school. And this was also a building that was for sale. Oh, there's one of those remarkably clear pictures. This is also supposed to be the square in Fayetteville, but it's supposed to be a really old. This was down in Huntsville, Alabama, which is just over the border. This place was called Low Mill, and it's supposed to be an old mill, obviously. Some really cool turrets and
a lot of those old structures were called mills, sugar mills, especially in South Carolina. Hawaii has old piles of stones, and this is an old sugar mill.
There's one of those things I was talking about. It's blank. Okay, here we are back in Petersburg. So my friend and I got out of the car. We were looking at this thing. This completely defies explanation. A lot of the buildings that we saw that had exposed walls and sometimes ends of walls, or there'd be a brick missing, and they're like 4 bricks thick, all like interlocked in a weird way. Probably some fabulous engineering that took a lot to knock them down. Sign up here that looks like it was after the fact. But then there was this thing in here. That thing.
Anybody's guess as to what it was?
A lot of this area they're restoring, which is really encouraging. So this is an old picture of the Pythian building. This is not my picture. This is a picture I found, because you see how it's obviously a storefront. So this could have been like, I don't know, 70s or something. It hasn't had a lot of changes.
Have you ever been to Jerome, Arizona?
Yes. Isn't it a ghost town?
Yeah.
Yes.
Some of the pictures that you're showing here remind me of Jerome.
Oh my gosh, so much. Have you been to Bisbee?
Mm-mm.
Or Globe?
I haven't been.
We went on an adventure up to where the crater is.
The I-40 meteor crater?
Meteor crater, right. There was a sinkhole in Nashville. And there was also the one bombing was in 2020, and there might have been subsequent ones, but in Nashville. Okay, look at that.
Is that where the explosion was? Because I remember that.
I know. I don't know, because this was taken last summer when I took my student there. And then after the fact, I was thinking, oh, geez, I wonder where that was. It's hard to tell precisely where it was. I'm sure here we go.
So you've got the brickwork there. So they're telling us 1887, and just look at the beautiful work just below where they've got it covered up. Just that one frieze with just beautiful detail work on it.
I know. Look at that. It's crazy. My student is working in architecture. She just graduated with her architecture degree, and she's working in Phoenix in architecture. I asked her what she thought about the style, and apparently they don't talk about that in architecture degrees. She goes, well, so far, she was just about to graduate, and she said, so far we've just done math. And I was like, oh, okay. But look at that. Yeah. It's amazing. They're actively destroying a lot of this stuff right now. It's really tragic. This was interesting. Of course, it was a bank. The American National Bank.
That would have been my guess. And this is in Nashville?
Yep. And then you get all these. I showed my daughter, I said, these are hard to build. My brother's a general contractor. Of course, he doesn't believe any of my rhetoric. He's totally bought into which is weird, because he was the person that initially made me very cynical, but he's very bought into the mainstream narrative. Read popular science as a boy and believes all of it.
He's not alone. A lot of people are.
Isn't that crazy? And the juxtaposition, I'm sure I took this because of that next to that. I mean, come on.
Front side of the building, you still have, it looks like the original roofing there, and then you have the rod going up, and that would have been part of the energy system.
Yeah, in that one Pythian picture, the power lines, nobody's really adequately explained that to me either. All those power line things that had so many layers to them, I don't think those were our same power lines. That was the corner of a church. I was just like, whoa, look at that. But one of the questions I had for you is the fireplace thing. My friend and I were talking about fireplaces. She distinctly remembers at her grandparents' house in Oklahoma, fireplaces that weren't deep enough for wood. What do you think about that?
That's part of the deception too, is what I think. They had to burn wood in order to provide a heating source for places that originally had an internal heating system. And
do you think though?
Uh-huh.
I mean, what if they had some other purpose?
So let's say that with the new narrative and the new world, if you will, whatever fireplaces were became the receptacles for fires. And so there's andirons. A viewer brought this to my attention. So if you look at andirons that hold the wood, some of them are works of art. Just absolutely
yes, we
gorgeous.
had them.
Drop dead gorgeous. Yeah. You're not going to stick a burning log on the things that are in museums. They served a different purpose too. So I would say, yes, definitely there is more to that story. It's not an area of expertise, but the detail work around some of these fireplaces is just breathtaking.
Yeah, and maybe the chimney wasn't a source to bring energy down into the house or something. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I would say something along those lines. Our history is nothing like what we've been taught. So it had some kind of advanced heating capability that we can't even imagine, because we were taken back so far from the technology that we were at that they just had to use whatever was available.
And concerning the wood, There seems to be at least some pictorial evidence that there was an outright assault on forests at some point and then cutting down those gigantic trees. And those might not even been the most gigantic trees, but we needed wood because we weren't smart enough to figure out stone. Because if we knew what they knew, why would you go for wood when you could do brick and stone? Clearly, they didn't know how to do brick and stone. So we cut down trees for wood. And then we burned wood and we turned wood into paper. I mean, all of that to me is a big question mark. And listening to, I don't know if I think it was you and Chad a long time ago and talking about all the tree stuff. And I've always felt like that trees were energy sources, and that I was in Sweden and the hotel where we stayed, the room was very European, very modular, but the whole thing was done in this beautiful, I guess it was maybe knotty pine, and it was stained. It was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. But there was an energy in that room that I felt was the wood. And then we sang in this hall that was likewise, it was entirely wood. The ceiling was, everything was wood. And I mean, the acoustic was phenomenal. It's a different sound. Wood is a different sound than rock, brick, marble, whatever. It still has that echoey aspect to it. It has a good resonance to it. But it's interesting that even the Sewanee one that we saw, there's always like, they've put some wood on the inside. And I wonder, is that original? Did they always use wood? Or I don't know. The wood thing is very puzzling to me.
I would say the original civilization used wood sustainably and responsibly. Not so with whatever came on afterwards. The lumber industry, you're talking about paper and furniture, and they're cutting down the trees for that. So that's one aspect. I mean, like clear cutting, these old growth forests, there aren't much left. And then, oh no, we can't make all the trees go away. Let's come in with our conservation movement and start replanting trees. Whew. You know, thank goodness for the Civilian Conservation Corps, because they did a lot of that work. And there's so much more to the tree story. I'm new to it. I know channels like Hangman and others have been looking at the trees for a long time. Chad brought it to my awareness about how important these original forests and gigantic trees were to this whole system and to us. There's so many connections between us and trees when you look at our veins and, you know, how we're built and how trees are built.
I see that pattern in so many things.
So there's a lot more to that story. And also, I think there was something to do with the mining, because if you start looking at trees as much more than what we've been taught to believe, there definitely seemed to be a connection with gold and silver and precious metals and coal and other things as well. So they were probably also cutting them down to get to whatever was in the root system.
So I was in this hotel room in Florence in an old world building. It was so cool. I did not take enough pictures of it, but I took pictures of a few curiosities.
Florence, Italy, or?
No, Florence, Alabama. It's just a little old world town, just like there are everywhere. It's crazy. But in this hotel, there was one that had exposed the brick under. They peeled part of the plaster away and so exposed the brick. In this old world building, they were capitalizing on the oldness, but like the ceiling's open up. It's a freaking tree up there. Look at that. Isn't that nuts?
Yes, there is.
I was like, wowza. Yeah. Obviously, they found it interesting. See, they've got the exposed brick in there.
The bricks in the corner I saw.
Yeah, there was it looked like an entire tree up in the ceiling. I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing. So when I was driving back from Massachusetts a few weeks ago, we were on US 15, and there was no way, as you can see, it's a little 2-lane in each direction. And the traffic was going like 65. There was no possibility, no shoulder, no place to pull up. And this is I found this on Google Earth. This is the only picture I could find on the internet. But we went through, at least a half a dozen of these bridges. They were phenomenal. Some of them had artwork on the outside, just like the scrolly stuff. I was like, wow. And I'm sure I've gone under these bridges before, but it was before I was looking at stuff. This one is pretty boring. It still looks really old, but it's boring. The ones that I saw that I wasn't able to take pictures of, and you kick yourself afterwards, like, I should have figured out a way. One of them was very Art Deco-y looking with the like straight lines, but with these carved in vertical, it was art. All of them were. And one of them was kind of castle-y. I was like, wow, these bridges are amazing. Like, how come no one ever mentioned that we have all these cool bridges? And why are they so cool? We're going to build a bridge here. Let's make sure we make it very ornate so that people that are driving under it will fly past it at 65 and not even notice it. Anyway, that's what that one's there for.
I'm familiar with Welch. It was on an alignment I was tracking from the Bermuda Triangle on up to Lake Itasca in Minnesota.
Such a cool little place. They ugly it out. This is all over the place. Let's put something, this is too pretty, we will make it ugly. This has got a lot of stuff going on here. We got some mud flood or whatever's going on there. This is kind of abandoned. Oh, do you know about this place?
Where is that one?
This is in Dallas, Texas.
I'm not familiar with this old red. I think I've seen something similar in other places.
One of the first people I met here is this very informative old guy at church who told me all these, just too many factoids for me to remember. But one of the stories that he told was that Dallas was founded by some guy who was from Fayetteville, Tennessee. And I looked it up, and that is the story. But then you look at the year and the population and the whatever, and then you find this thing and you're like, the whole mound thing everywhere here. It's rolling hills and green and everything. And I'm so used to the topography in Arizona. Of course, there are a lot of anomalies in Arizona. And I always feel like Arizona is just scorched earth. Like something really bad happened there. You know, when you look at the map from above and you see the brown areas and you just think, wow, they really nuked that place. You know, it's very strange. But we've got these things, they're big, but they're like really pointy, covered with grass, and usually there's like a little tuft of forest at the top, like dense trees. But what do you suppose that is?
There were a lot more trees here than we know. I think a lot more.
But the pointy little mini mountain things, what do you think those are?
They could be pyramids.
Or buildings, just the roadways in general. As I've driven along the highways, there'll be a wall and there's absolutely perfect horizontal lines in the wall. Sometimes they're slanted, but they're all going along this wall for a period of time. And there's one exactly the same on the other side, but not always lined up. Have you ever seen those? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
I think that the water narrative that we've been told is entirely fictitious. I don't think that we have any shortage of water. I think there's plenty of water we know what to do with, that they'd rather just take poo water and put chemicals in it and sell it back to us than let us have the real clean water.
There's definitely a lot more to that story. And all we really have are guesses as to what's really going on. But the fact that you're asking the questions, that we're starting to ask these questions is huge, because the veil is lifting from our eyes and not everybody's ready for it. But for those that are, there's a lot of work to be done. You're just trying to figure all that out. So when I was first waking up to this, I was living in Oklahoma City and I had some travel friends. And this is when I was starting to wake up to all the stuff that we're talking about. And there was a Red Rock Canyon outside of Oklahoma City in Hinton, Oklahoma. And I was looking at pictures of it and I'm like, that looks like a wall. We've got to go there. And so we took a trip there. And then it was Super Bowl Sunday. I think it was 2015. I'm pretty sure was the year. We walked around and sure enough, I mean, it looked like a very, very old structure. There were clues there. And one of my friends was having a real problem with starting to see things because she wasn't ready for it yet. And so there was water on the rock. And as I remember, she started crying because her brain was not computing. She did not understand what water was doing on the rock. It kind of got to be too much for her after a while. Anyway, I don't have an explanation for that, but I agree. There's a lot more to that story with the water.
I remember my brother telling me a long time ago when we first were in Arizona, and he said, you have primary water there. And I go, primary water? And he goes, yeah, primary water down there flowing along in the rock. There's a town southeast of Tucson called St. David's, and it's really green. Like you're driving along and it's desert, 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 desert. And then all of a sudden it's really, really green. Well, actually there's a town called Green Valley. It's not far from there, but we're driving through there. I was driving through there with my brother and he said, see, primary water here. There's no evidence of drought. Everything's green. Why is everything green? This was many, many years ago. Before, this is the same brother that won't listen to some of my crazy new rants. But he was at one time, and he just accepted things that weren't mainstream as being true. And he said, yeah, there's definitely primary water here. You can see the evidence of it. Here, there's literally just fresh water everywhere. And yet the water that comes out of our tap, I distill all my water because the water that comes out of the tap is horrible. I bought a device to measure the stuff that's in the water. And what's left over in the distiller after you distill it is nasty.
Yeah, I find the same kind of thing around where I live. So there's the Verde Valley, which is the other side of where I live, where Sedona, Cottonwood, Camp Verde, Clarkdale. There's a ton of underground water there. And Oak Creek Canyon, gorgeous. Trees everywhere.
Yeah, I'm totally familiar with that area.
Montezuma as well. I'll have to put the stats up for that. They don't know where the water comes from, but there's these underground aquifers that are never ending with high volume of water. And yet the narrative tells us this was the Sinagua culture, no water here, and they had to leave because of drought. Well, there's plenty of water here.
And also, why is it that we're not allowed to drill wells? There's a huge control over well drilling.
Good questions. And there are certainly controls that are placed over things like that, and places you can go and not go. Places in the Grand Canyon you can't go. I've heard that about other places. It's guarded, you can't go there. So they definitely have gatekeepers for certain subjects, and they just don't want people nosing around and finding things.
So I have one more file from our recent visit to Massachusetts that has some questiony things in here.
I've looked at Salem a little bit. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff there.
Oh, this is Custom House. These are all over the place. So this was, okay, this killed me. Home for Aged Women, 1861.
And that's an example when we were talking earlier about asylums and things like that. They have all kinds of homes.
Oh, there's another one of those things. I take pictures of those things. I mean, I don't know why you'd have a decorative thing with nothing on there, you know? It seems like it should say something. So these are all, that looks like Faneuil Hall in Boston, but it's the town hall in Salem. So here, this kind of ties back with the wood thing. Do you know what the House of the Seven Gables is?
I've heard of it.
It's wooden, and it's supposed to be from, I think, the 1600s. So yeah, there was the Puritans and all that, and those were the people that my history's not very good. Now I'm sort of glad about it because I think it's fiction.
I loved history, and I'm glad that I studied it because I know what they tell us about a lot of things.
Well, there were certain aspects of it, and I used to watch the History Channel all the time. My world is more shattered from my love of geology and archaeology and that, and I'm learning what a story all that was. So I think Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote a story called The House of the Seven Gables.
Rings a bell.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've read it. I don't remember it. So it's a wooden building, and it's got the little itty bitty windows. And my mom told me that the reason why they use the little itty bitty windows, the leaded glass, is because glass was expensive and hard to import. But those buildings are wood. And she lived in a house that was built in the 1800s, and it's wood. Were they using wood simultaneously with the big block and brick? And how is it that those wooden structures have made it since the 1600s? They didn't get burned down.
I think they selectively burned places down. I would say yes. What we think of as Victorian homes that are wood were built by the original civilization. So yeah, I would say they had both.
You think that the Victorian homes were built by the same people that built the brick block stuff?
I do. Oh. I see the Victorian era as being like the major era of the reset, and they just took credit for everything. I can show you a picture of a home in Jerome that looks like one I've seen in Oklahoma, on the East Coast, in Rhode Island, Nova Scotia. It's the same style of home. Yes, I do think that they were doing that. My belief is that there was a time manipulation when they did whatever caused the cataclysm, which I believe was deliberately caused. I think they also messed with time at the same time. And I think we're still living and working in the original homes and buildings like we've been seeing here in your show.
You don't think that the buildings that they tell us were built in the 1800s were built in the 1800s, and the stone ones were actually built hundreds of years earlier?
I think they were both built by the same civilization.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think the Victorian homes were built during the Victorian era. I think they were reattributed like everything else. I believe that there was a time manipulation.
Added or taken away?
Yeah, they overlaid it with their own timeline is what I think. And, you know, you hear about the missing 1,000 years, and I think it's all in there, but it's probably more complex than just taking 1,000 years off the calendar. I think they messed with time, and we think we're advanced, but we're far regressed from where we were.
Oh, that seems to be clear. I know. It feels like some of the stuff that we do now is like watching a toddler trying to put together a Lego that's intended for a much older child, fumbling along, trying to figure it out. But it seems as though the time has been like so many other things. It's so convoluted. There's so many areas where they mess with things that you kind of don't even know where to begin. It's just such a gumbo of
Right.
screwing around with things. Like the month don't have the right number of days, so we have to make things up, and the hours and the day, nothing adds up. So you think it might just be a lie. Like, is there a way to divide the year that goes with the cycles of the moon that adds up?
The original calendars did. They were like cyclic, whether the Hebrew calendar or the Mayan calendar or the Egyptian calendar, it was cyclic in nature. And so it reflected natural cycles instead of linear time like the Gregorian calendar.
What do you think about all the things that have been made into lore? Like, for instance, a griffin in Salem, the old clock had a griffin on it. Like griffins and Sasquatch and Loch Ness Monster, dragons. Do you think those might have actually existed?
They do. I'm very open to that. Dragons for sure, and they may be the dinosaurs, but let's put dragons on there. Sasquatch, yes, very much believe. I'm not an experiencer, but there's something to it. Fairies and elves and unicorns and merpeople. There's evidence there, and some people actually are able to interact. I'm not one of them, but that's all been hidden for some reason or another from our awareness. I think they're starting to come back in because I think with the veil lifting, I think there needs to be some kind of reconciliation at some point, and I think that's in process. But more people need to be awake to accept that it's not a fairy tale.
That's good to hear you say, because that's what I think too. I like, if they make it a fairy tale, it's real. I think the whole reason they had the dinosaurs was so that they could advance the narrative, and we came out of goo and all that.
They're pretty sneaky that way.
And the history is, you just think it's a hodgepodge of truth and untruth?
I don't think they invented it from scratch, but they fabricated a lot of history. So I think a lot of historical characters probably did exist, but maybe not the way that we're told. And events and other things, I think they just reworked it to support the narrative. And, maybe the Jesuits were involved in that, and the Freemasons and secret societies that I mentioned earlier that were resetting everything. But it may have come from a different group. So let's say the Jesuits, the ones into the educational side of things. Maybe they were the ones that did that. And you hear about like Scaliger and history, fact or fiction. Fomenko talked a lot about that kind of thing. The father of modern chronology is Scaliger. He may have been the one that reworked things to come up with a new chronology.
Somebody I was listening to or reading about a long time ago is I read a lot of material that was from, historical novels, and that would be a perfect area where one could pass on a narrative because it's in a novel, but it's supposed to be based on history. So then we start like the Bronte sister. I'm just trying to think of those old writers.
Mishner too. I believe you're exactly right. And I've done some research into that, that these authors that we have to read in school, are forced to read in school, Jack London and Mark Twain and Charles Dickens and Victor Hugo, they were actually shaping the new narrative. So they were the ones that were giving us our new history.
I feel like we need to really use caution when we try to cite historical things while we're at the same time saying that this history could be bunk.
Yeah, I basically have gone deep into timeline research. I can pull it out and say, this is what the narrative says about this place or this event, and then go and show examples of the architecture and other things. And so, yeah, it is suspect, but it's what we've got. And then we just have to kind of read between the lines. And that's something that I focus on, is reading between the lines where the story falls short. Okay, they built this in 1931, Depression. They built this in 1861, the Civil War. The stories just fall flat. And that's where you can kind of start to pick it apart and see how flimsy it really is. They were not original. All the courthouses.
Someday you need to come here to the South and we'll do a fun trip together.
Well, I appreciate your coming on with me today, Stephanie.
Appreciate being here. Thank you. Thanks for all the answers to so many questions.
And we can do it again sometime. So just let me know.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.